Let's start with the Dormition Church of Kongdopauga. This seemingly simple plan that we see on the left includes a nave, which is the large body of the church, a narthex, which is often described as a porch. It's really the entry space. It's a liminal space between the outside secular world and the sacred world that is constructed inside of these churches, cathedrals, and specialized spaces. After passing through the nave, one approaches the solia, and the solia is a particular term to these churches of northwestern Russia. And then behind that is the sanctuary, or the Holy of Holies, a very specialized space, generally reserved only for a priest or a high practitioner. But take a minute with the images here on the right. What are a few things that stand out about the building itself? What looks different from what we've seen before? What looks similar? Jot down a few notes and email them to me. You can pause the video to take more time with it, of course. After that exterior form where we see a log cabin type construction, it seems very straightforward. Those exteriors look as if we can see all of the form, all of the structure in the way that the wood is assembled. And in many ways that's true, but in other ways it's taken generations to build up that seemingly simple technique of log cabin log stacking into the very tight, waterproof, and well acclimatized structures that we're looking at today. So from that exterior, seeming like a little more rugged exterior, you come into the nave of these churches and find spectacular murals and finishes, like the one that we see here on the roof, up on the ceiling itself. Unfortunately, this entire church was burned to the ground in the summer of 2018. And this fact marks out one of the highest risks of tree-based architecture. They are, of course, incredibly vulnerable to fire. So let's take a look now at Kizipogos. What we're looking at on the left is the Church of the Transformation. It's 37 meters high, approximately 121 feet, or to get your head around it, it's about a 12-story building. It's made out of over 3,000 logs. And then those shining shingles on the top that look like metal were in fact made out of poplar wood, and that poplar was chosen for that shining, gleaming quality. Currently, the larger church here is being repaired. It was built on top of an older graveyard or cemetery, and the building itself did not have a stone foundation. The soft ground beneath has shifted and caused the building to tilt. And even though during the Soviet era, most religious architecture, most religious forms, most religious art was under threat from the communist revolution, the Soviet-era government did reinforce this building with iron columns to increase the stability of this particular church. This whole complex was in fact set aside as almost an outdoor museum. The island where these three churches that we're looking at, or the two churches and the bell tower in the center, it's far to the north. It is a highly preserved region, and these particular structures were gathered there to be preserved, to be honored as a cultural history, even as practitioners still continue to use them. The other fascinating thing about these structures is that they were built without a single nail. So going back to that idea of a perceived simplicity that was quite intricate in its makeup, you'll see in the next clip exactly what I'm talking about. So as you saw from that flyover in the video, and as you were reading some of the details about the building itself, what stands out? For me, and I think for many, it's those incredible onion domes on the top of this church. They're so unique, so unusual, or so we think. But the volume, the quantity of them just really marks these buildings as unique. You can see that dome shape play out in the series of plans to the right. At the top, number 1, you see the Church of the Transfiguration. And what do you notice first about the plan? What's the overall shape? It's largely cruciform in nature, right? The church architect or builder, the one using the single axe for the entire project, as we just saw, really wanted this to be a symbol that was visible from the sky or visible from the heavens, and he marked this out in the shape of a cross. Then we see each of the domes delineated in that plan, these beautiful little circles with what we usually take to symbolize a column, that point in the middle, but here it symbolizes something different. It's the spire, and we'll get into what each of these are called in the next slide. In the middle, you see the bell tower, that smaller structure with one dome on the top, one onion dome on the top. And then third is the Church of the Intercessor. This church functioned as the winter church, while the larger Church of the Transfiguration was airy and open for the summer. It was too difficult to heat that volume of air to keep that warm for practitioners. So in the winter, the practicing group would move over to the Church of the Intercession, which was smaller and could be heated with wood-burning stoves. You see the problem there of using a wood-burning stove inside a wooden structure, one that repeats around the world and throughout history. All right, let's dive into the terminology. So we have these beautiful forms. Let's start at the top with the onion dome, and that's the part that looks very much like it's described. It looks like an onion with a pointing tip at the top. They're bulbous. They are decorative in large part. Next, we have the spire. And while the spires here have a cross on the top, spires can contain a myriad of things. Sometimes you'll see weather vanes at the top, sometimes you'll see other symbols, but the spire is simply that thin, narrow, symbolic part coming up off the top of the dome. Next, we have the cupola, and a cupola can take many forms. Here, of course, the cupola is a combination of the onion dome and its pedestal below. But sometimes a cupola will have a square pedestal and something like a gabled roof or a hipped roof on top. This takes a lot of different forms, but you see a cupola generally on top of a roof. It can sometimes be an air vent. It can sometimes be a place where the fireplace is open to the air. And then next, we have the kokoshnik. The kokoshnik is this emblematic form, certainly for the people of northern Russia. As we see here, this is sort of a chicken and the egg conundrum, because these headdresses that we're seeing on the women pictured, from ancient times to the two in the bottom left who are at a soccer match, those headdresses are also called kokoshniks. And it is not clear whether those headdresses came first and the architecture of the cathedrals was mirrored after them, or if the architecture of the cathedrals came first and the headdress was mirrored after that architectural form. Either way, it's iconic. It stands out as something uniquely Russian. What is not uniquely Russian are... Here's another one more embellished. It has gold elements on it and is very richly painted. All right, let's get to the plan. So as we saw in that earlier film, the Central Byzantine plan often takes its cues from something like this. So on the left, we have the narthex, which is the porch. It is that transitional liminal space. People would meet and greet there as they moved into the symbolically holier space of the cathedral. Once they have moved through the narthex into the cathedral, the first point of encounter is usually the aisle, and that is just what we think about it when we think about an aisle in the grocery store. It's a place of movement, a place for walking, a place for transitioning through the space on foot. So this aisle, you can imagine people walking around that aisle to find their seat, to find their place of contemplation. And then at the heart of this central plan, and it's called a central plan because it centers around this primary central space called the nave. The nave is a spot where people would sit, kneel, worship in their chosen form. The sanctuaries we talked about earlier, of course, is like the Holy of Holies. We see these throughout religious architecture around the world. There is often a designated sanctuary space. And then we have what's called the apse. The apse is a rounded, it's generally a rounded, semicircular form that comes off of the body of this cathedral itself. We'll study the apse and each of these forms in more detail as we move into medieval and Gothic architecture. For now, that's all I have. This is a short lecture. Take the time to review the videos that I'm going to post with it and be ready to identify these parts on the plan. Take care.